Unthinkable, but no longer impossible. For years, the world has expected China to invade Taiwan. Even Xi Jinping has declared that no one can stop the reunification. But behind the scenes, Beijing may be preparing for something far more ambitious and far more dangerous. A growing body of evidence, including leaked Russian intelligence, suggests China could move on Siberia first, not Taiwan. And if it does, the global balance of power could be shattered overnight. At first glance, it sounds absurd. Why would China invade one of its closest strategic partners, especially now when the two nations appear more united than ever? As Western sanctions imposed on Russia have effectively severed the country's connections with large parts of Europe and North America, the Kremlin has increasingly looked eastward to maintain the strong levels of trade and investment it needs to prop up its faltering wartime economy. China has well and truly answered the call. In the years since the invasion of Ukraine began, the Asian giant has become by far the biggest buyer of Russian fossil fuels, investing hundreds of billions of dollars in oil, coal and gas. Overall levels of trade between Russia and China have also surged to record highs in recent years, reaching $245 billion in 2024, which was double the amount of 2020, with Russian exports to China largely revolving around the aforementioned fossil fuels and natural resources, while Chinese imports to Moscow include everything from cars and tractors to electronics and consumer goods. In many ways, it's only thanks to China that Russia's economy is still alive, and it's been able to keep its wasteful war in Ukraine going this long, as one Russian official recently admitted. Without them, China, we would not been able to make a single missile, let alone a drone, and the whole economy would have collapsed long ago. If they wanted it, the war would have been over long ago. Beijing's ever-increasing investment in Russian oil has helped to counteract the fact that so many other countries, like most of Europe, have minimized their reliance on Russia's resources throughout the 2020s. China has also aided Russia when it comes to working around Western sanctions to import the all-important dual-use goods its war machine requires. For reference, dual-use products include any goods that can have both civilian and military applications, which might include certain kinds of chemicals or electronic components, like sensors and computer chips. Almost no countries, except for North Korea and Iran, want to be seen sending actual weapons or military vehicles to Russia. But China is able to get around this issue, preserving its geopolitical standing while sending materials and products to Russia that it can use to make tanks, drones and more. Russia, meanwhile, is unable to make any of these products itself and has become enormously dependent on China to provide them. The leaders of the two countries, Putin and Xi, have also seemingly grown closer in recent times, meeting in person on several occasions, and the two countries' militaries have also carried out dozens of joint military exercises in recent times too. But cracks have started to show. For example, 2024 saw 11 joint exercises between China and Russia, while there were just 4 in 2025. Trade charts too reveal that even if China remains by far the biggest buyer of Russian resources, the amount it's investing in the country are starting to decline. And while the two countries go to great lengths to paint a picture that their relations have never been better, trouble may be brewing behind the curtain, as a report from Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the United Kingdom's leading defence and security think tank, concludes. The long-term dynamics of this relationship suggest a purely transactional approach, with China exploiting Russia's economic weaknesses. Ultimately, Putin, through his dreams of Russian revanchism, has transformed Russia into a tool for its ambitious and unreliable eastern neighbour. We already know, based on a recent report from the Bank of Finland's Institute for New Economies, that Chinese exporters have started taking advantage of Russia's weakened position. Many have hiked the prices of dual-use goods heading to Moscow, with some prices seeing close to 90% surges between 2021 and 2024. Compared to just 9% for those same goods going to other countries around the world. In response, Russia has been forced to scale back some of its purchases, and quotes from high-ranking Russian officials suggest that their relationship with China isn't as friendly as it may seem from the outside. China doesn't behave like an ally. Sometimes it lets us down and stops payments, sometimes it takes advantage, sometimes it's outright robbery. There's nothing allied about it. Within the Federal Security Service, FSB, Russia's main intelligence agency, opinions are even harsher. This was revealed in June 2025, when an 8-page report was somehow obtained by the Ares Leaks cybercrime group and shared with reporters at the New York Times, who passed it on to Western intelligence agencies and shared some of its fascinating details online for all to see. The report describes a tense and dynamically developing intelligence battle playing out in the shadows between the two nations. It also reveals that mere days before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the FSB approved a new counterintelligence program entitled Entente 4. Now, the purpose of this program was clear: to prevent Chinese spies from undermining Russian interests. The timing too tells us a lot. Just as Russia was about to dedicate so many of its military resources to Ukraine, its intelligence services were clearly concerned about China seizing the opportunity to exploit the country's weakened and distracted defenses. As a result, a new intelligence unit was formed with the sole responsibility of monitoring Chinese intelligence activities and warning of any potential threats. That unit has made some worrying findings as far as the Kremlin is concerned. The report notes that China is viewed by some within the FSB as the enemy and that it poses a serious threat to Russian security. Officers report that Beijing is increasingly attempting to recruit Russian spies to operate on its behalf and get its hands on sensitive Russian military secrets and technologies, even going as far as trying to lure disaffected Russian scientists to join its ranks or share classified intelligence. In response, the FSB has ordered its officers to intercept this threat and to prevent the transfer of important strategic information to the Chinese. They've carried out in-person meetings with multiple Russian citizens who work closely with China, informing them that Beijing was attempting to take advantage of Russia and warning them against sharing any important intelligence. The agency has also ordered the constant accumulation of information about users of one of China's top messaging apps, WeChat. It's hacked into phones of espionage targets and analysed data to find out more about China's true intentions and hidden plans. As a result of these activities, the FSB officers claim to have found evidence that China is actively spying on Russia's military operations in Ukraine in order to improve its understanding of Western weapons and warfare. Not only that, but in the biggest bombshell of the entire report, the FSB also expressed fear that China is laying the groundwork to make claims on Russian territory. They also say that China's agents are already operating in the Arctic region, using the likes of mining firms and research centers as cover for their real espionage activities. The prospect of China encroaching on Russia's territory is a long-held fear among Kremlin officials and Russian nationalists. The two nations share the world's longest border, stretching an extraordinary 2,615 miles or 4,208 kilometers, and China doesn't necessarily agree with how that border was drawn. Many of its nationalists have for years argued that the 19th century treaties that Russia used to annex large parts of land, like the Pacific port city of Vladivostok, are unfair, with some longing for the day when the maps might be redrawn and China can claim land that many feels belongs to it. In many ways, China has already quite publicly laid the foundations for this. In 2023, it published new maps that included historical Chinese names for towns and cities within Russia's territory, with its Ministry of Natural Resources issuing a requirement that all future Chinese maps involving Russia's Far East region should use the Chinese monikers, not the Russian ones. Vladivostok, for example, is referred to as Haishenwai. Another interesting change to China's maps was spotted on an island along the international border. That island, known as Bolshoi Ussuriski Island in Russian and Black Bear Island in Chinese, sits at the confluence of the Amur and Ussuri rivers and has been shared between the two countries since the 2008 Sino-Russian border agreement, with China owning a large part of the land and Russia retaining the rest. The latest Chinese maps, however, show the island as entirely being within China's borders. On top of all of this, Chinese farmers have reportedly started buying up large amounts of land in Russia's border region of Primorsky Krai. This region was ceded to Russia by Chinese Qing dynasty back in 1860, but has since become a subject of increasing interest among Beijing's policymakers and Chinese nationalists. Indeed, just as Vladimir Putin likes to claim that all of Ukraine belongs to Russia, China's leadership largely feels a similar way about Primorsky Krai, as well as other far eastern Siberian territories. And with Xi Jinping repeatedly stressing the importance of what he calls the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility that China would want to take these territories for itself. This is a growing concern for Russia, particularly now as the country's geopolitical standing and once strong economy have both suffered such serious hits due to war losses, sanctions, and international isolation. The FSB report notes that Chinese academics are allegedly already at work on promoting territorial claims against Russia and building pools of evidence to use to support those claims. They're said to be searching for traces of ancient Chinese peoples in Russia's Far East regions, potentially to influence local opinions and cement the narrative that China has fair and legitimate claims on those locations. In response, the FSB is ordering its officers to expose such revanchist behavior and counteract Chinese attempts to use Russia's own scientists or archival funds to support its research, with one memo ordering, "Conduct preventative work with respect to Russian citizens involved in said activities. Restrict entry into our country for foreigners as a measure of influence." But it's not only in the Far East that Russia needs to worry about China encroaching on its land or expanding its own sphere of influence. The FSB agents also found that Beijing is working on a new strategy to strengthen its influence and soft power across Central Asian nations, many of which were once part of the Soviet Union and have long relied on Russia as their main source of trade, security, and support. China began this new approach in Uzbekistan, according to the FSB's intelligence. It doesn't go into details about how the strategy works or what's involved, aside from a brief mention of some sort of humanitarian exchange. This, however, will be seen as cause for grave concern in Russia. The country has already lost so many of its trade deals around the globe and seen many of its international connections slashed in response to its reckless and brutal actions in Ukraine. It's running out of friends fast, and it desperately needs to maintain connections with the countries that have historically depended on it. Countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. Several of those nations have already shown signs of slipping out of Moscow's orbit in recent times, with many of their leaders and government officials gradually realizing that Russia may no longer be the ideal partner to work with. As a recent Hudson Institute report notes, in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war and the cascading effects of Western sanctions, the 5 Central Asian republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, are recalibrating their foreign policies, asserting their sovereignty, and embracing a multipolar future. This regional realignment is ending Russia's century-old monopoly over Central Asia. Now, some of those countries have started to look west, forging stronger connections with the United States and European nations. And if the FSB's report is accurate, some may also be looking east, building bonds with China and discovering new possibilities for trade deals, security arrangements, and mutual cooperation that will gradually weaken the ties that bind them to Moscow. The more power and influence China gains in these regions and others, the more confident it may become about taking action against Russia. And the FSB report's revelations still don't end there. It also highlighted China's interest in Russia's vast Arctic and Northern Sea route territory, which stretches out along the country's northern coast. In the past, the waters beside that coastline were too icy for shipping, so held little economic value. But as climate change continues, temperatures rise, and ice caps melt, this part of the world may soon become a much more viable and valuable shipping lane. It could slash the current shipping times between Asia and Europe, paving the way for dramatically more efficient trade between China and dozens of different countries, boosting the size and value of both its imports and exports. Russia has, in the past, exerted strict control over Chinese activities in the Arctic, but with the country in one of its weakest ever positions, the time might be right for Beijing to strike. As Western sanctions multiply and intensify, Beijing reportedly believes that Russia will need China's help in maintaining its aging Arctic infrastructure. In fact, this is already happening. In recent times, Russian gas company Novatek has been seeking help from China to salvage its Arctic liquefied natural gas project, having previously worked with the US firm Baker Hughes. The FSB report claims that Chinese spies are already circling around the Arctic region, seeking information about Russia's development and plans for the region. Given all of this, when weighing up the pros and cons of invading Siberia or Taiwan, it's actually quite easy to see how China could decide that making a move on Russia is actually the much smarter and more strategic decision at this moment in time. Again, on paper, that sounds ludicrous given that Russia is a vastly larger and more powerful entity than Taiwan. It's 475 times larger to be precise, with a population 6 times greater. But this isn't a question of size or perceived military strength, it's a question of opportunity and timing. Right now, the timing might not be quite right in Beijing's mind for an assault on Taiwan. Let's not forget that even though it may be a relatively small island, it's separated from China by the 100-mile Taiwan Strait. As past conflicts have proven, crossing large bodies of water is a major challenge for any warfaring nation. During World War II, for example, Hitler's forces found it almost impossible to cope with the 22-mile gap that separated France from the United Kingdom. The Taiwan Strait is much broader and heavily defended by both Taiwan's own modernized military force and the support of its allies, including the world's leading military superpower, the United States. A 2023 war game carried out by the Center for Strategic and International Studies found that any attempt at a Chinese invasion of Taiwan was almost guaranteed to fail, while also generating huge losses for all involved. Indeed, the study estimated that, over the course of a 3-week conflict, China could lose at least 10,000 troops along dozens of combat aircraft and naval vessels. The economic aftermath would also be enormous. A 2024 analysis, carried out by Bloomberg Economics, suggested that a war with Taiwan would cost the world around $10 trillion, or 10% of the globe's entire gross domestic product, GDP. Global supply chains would also be shattered due to the fact that Taiwan is a leading player in producing important semiconductors, which are vital elements in the world's tech sector. With such catastrophic potential costs, combined with the risk of all-out global war with the US and its allies, it's not difficult to see why China might decide against attacking Taiwan for now. Attacking Russia, however, would likely not lead to such severe consequences. Firstly, Russia has very few allies right now, and is in fact enormously dependent on China to survive. There wouldn't be huge coalitions of countries leaping to its defense if China's People's Liberation Army, PLA, decided to cross its borders and claim its land. The Siberian territories are also vast and rich in natural resources, including oil, gas, gold, diamonds, and rare earth minerals, all vital for sustaining and strengthening China's economy. Siberia is also rich in fresh water, with its Lake Baikal alone holding a staggering 20% of the world's unfrozen freshwater supplies. At a time when many of China's drier northern provinces are struggling with droughts and water scarcity, taking control of such vast quantities of the world's most precious resource could provide incalculable benefits. Overall, taking control of just some of Siberia's many resources could prove so much more important economically for China than a Taiwan takeover. It would finally have access to the resources it needs to meet its projected GDP growth targets, address ever-increasing energy demands, and secure the vital materials it needs to power other projects like its ongoing military modernization and investments in green technology. So, while Taiwan undoubtedly remains a long-term goal, Russia actually represents a much more logical, valuable, and achievable target for China at the moment. And if the FSB's intelligence is accurate, plans for the invasion are already underway. And with China going to great lengths to strengthen its military, ahead of the PLA centenary celebrations in 2027, a full-scale invasion might not be all that far away. Now, to learn more about how Russia has dug itself into a deeper and darker hole than Putin could ever have imagined, check out this video, which looks at the astonishing real numbers of Russian troop losses in Ukraine so far. Alternatively, check out our detailed breakdown of how Putin's desperate quest for power has massively backfired, causing irreparable damage to his country's standing, solidarity, and economy. And finally, to ensure you don't miss out on more breaking military news and detailed video reports like this one, subscribe to our channel today.